Hi, everyone. My name is Sylvia Zenteno. I'm the Director of Educational Programs and Training here at It's On Us, and joining you from DC to add to the chat. And today we are going to talk about the amazing film, The University, which we have given you all access to watch, and hopefully you've already taken a look. If not, we do want to provide a spoiler alert because we may go over some things that are part of the film if you haven't finished it. So definitely wanted to mention that. Just a quick intro about It's On Us. Our mission here is to build the movement to combat campus sexual assault by engaging all students, including young men, and activating the largest student organizing program of its kind in grassroots awareness and prevention education programs. And I am here co-hosting with Kenyora Parham from End Rape on Campus, and I will pass it on to her.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's conversation, Meet and Greet the Cast of the University. For End Rape on Campus, our mission is to end campus sexual assault by providing direct support services for survivors in their communities, prevention through education, and policy reform on the campus, local, and state and federal levels. So welcome.
Thanks so much, Kenyora. And we do want to, before we get the conversation started, we do want to provide a trigger warning for sexual violence, both for the film and for this conversation, and to the filmmaker, and to our main character and our filmmaker. We do want to also say that as we go through this conversation, don't feel like you really need to share anything, or really just share whatever you're comfortable sharing with the audience. And then we want to just quickly provide some resources in the chat. Thank you, Kenyora. So to anyone who needs anything, or a friend needs anything, please feel free to share these. We do want to say that this call is being recorded, and please stay on mute. But if you have any questions throughout, please feel free to paste them into the chat box. And if we have time at the end, we can add them to the queue. So you can either paste them publicly, or you can send them to me or to Kenyora privately, whatever you're comfortable with. And then I'll pass it on to Kenyora.
Hello again. So first I want to just say thank you so much to both Juliana, who's the writer and director of the University, and actress Carly Van Liere, who plays Abby in the film. Thank you so much for joining us today. As Sylvia mentioned earlier, we're going to provide you with a little bit of a spoiler alert, where I'm essentially going to just provide you with a very brief synopsis of the plot. So Abby is a college freshman with hopes of starting a life away from home, traveling the world and falling in love. Within the first few months of being on campus, she's sexually assaulted by a peer. Without a legal team or advocate behind her, Abby's opportunity to be a curious student feels lost. She carries a lot of shame and fears coming forward with her story. Abby withdraws from her roommate, Liere, who doesn't understand Abby's new behaviors. Eventually, Liere encourages Abby to report to the police. With a daunting process of going to court looming, if her case makes it, and the skeptical reception of her story by police, Abby turns to her campus Title IX reporting process instead. From the clouded motivations of school administrators to the pressures of friendship and family, Abby's journey through the Title IX process reveals the barriers faced by survivors of assault. Not only is it rare that a survivor comes forward with their story, but it can be traumatic. Told from multiple points of view, each voice pieces together not just what happened on the night of Abby's assault, but how the campus community comes to understand themselves in the knowledge of this or resists responsibility. So for anyone who has not watched the film yet, We do have a link for you that you will be able to watch at any time that you wish, that Sylvia's just pasted in the chat box. So with that, I'm going to hand it back to Sylvia, who will begin our conversations with Juliana and Carly.
Thank you, Kenyora. And hello, Juliana and Carly. Just to start the conversation, I do really want to ask Juliana, like, can you tell us a little bit about the process of getting this film made and put out there? Like, this is a really tough topic, and we're just curious on how that process was for you.
Yeah, so it's interesting. I actually learned when I was preparing for this event that It's On Us started like the same month that I wrote the first draft of this script, which was in 2014, that fall. And basically my school at the time, the University of Michigan, was being investigated for mishandling a series of Title IX complaints. And I was already interested in this topic, both personally and, through an academic lens as well. And I was like, what is Title IX? Like, I didn't know how united that these like mishandlings were happening across the country on all these different college campuses. So like once I learned the story of my school, I was like, oh, this is happening everywhere. Around that time, the documentary The Hunting Ground came out as well, looking more at like the student organizers who led that whole effort to let students know that that was an option for them to file these complaints. And basically, I'm a writer, and my tools in the world for understanding things and questions are to write through them. And so I used some of my personal experience as well as some of the research that I was finding when I was looking at how this was like happening all around the country. And I crafted the script. So 2014, we had the draft, and then it was written as a feature film originally. And then I had an opportunity to use students as producers and as actors, which is where I met Carly. And we spent a summer in the summer of 2016 using the university resources. So we were just reminiscing the other day about how we would like sneak into where I was living. There was a pool. So that's how we got the pool shot. We just like, really, it was a scrappy production of just using resources at hand. And it felt really right to do that because it was a story about a university and about students. And so we were able to pull from this pool of talent that was already available at Michigan. And it took us a few years to get it released. And it's just been like a process of figuring out like what form to let it take and how we want to reach our audience. So so much has changed since that first draft in 2014. We've had like two different presidents and administrations. So yeah, I'm really just excited to see how it can plug into that conversation now that we're at this new space.
Wow, it's really interesting to hear that it has been such a long process. First off, I just want to say thank you for that. I also want to say that this is really coming at a perfect time for us in particular because, Kenyora and I have been going into COVID. We were really in this space where we wanted to do something that was not just the same thing over and over again on Zoom. And so having this as like a creative way to engage for awareness was really helpful for us and for our audience. And so I want to say thanks for sticking with it all of this time. And you can tell that like both of your hearts are really in the film. And from there, I definitely want to pass it on to you, Carly. So you play Abby in the film, and can you tell us a little bit about your experience preparing for this role?
Yeah, so preparing for the role was largely like psychological research, researching like what happens to a survivor of a traumatic event, and sort of like the waves in which your mind and your body tries to incorporate this into your life. So in that way, it was like kind of like medical in a way. Like it was a lot of like, oh my God, sorry, my cat, she's been away. And then as soon as it's my time to speak, she's like poking around here. Yeah, so we researched like surprising ways too that, oh, thanks, very cute, that a survivor of a traumatic event processes it with like laughing in moments or, you know, different sensory details that can like bring you back. So it was a lot of like mapping that type of stuff out. It's funny, I'm watching Succession right now, and I guess spoiler alert for Succession, but I watched an episode after watching the pilot to prepare for this, and like the main character in Succession goes through a traumatic event, and then I commented like he's acting robotic almost, and it's because he's like that's how it's happening for him. That's like how his mind and his body and his everything is like dealing with this. And so it's kind of like the same thing with her. But yeah, the sensory details and then little character details too about like her life as an international studies major and like her goals and hopes. And we like put a map up in her room, like little character details like that you kind of get a glimpse of, but then you don't really get to see them that much because like she kind of loses herself, and the rest of the story is about her like treading water and like trying to survive this. So yeah.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. Absolutely. And I put in the chat like yes plus plus about the neurobiology of trauma, right? Like when someone is experiencing trauma, they often they're not able to organize their thoughts the way that they would be normally in a chronological order. They're not able to sometimes remember all of the details, and that doesn't mean that someone's not telling the truth and that didn't happen to them. So yes, absolutely, so important. And from there, I want to move on. Question for Juliana. So within the first 15 minutes of the film, we're watching through a series of flashbacks and present day where, from the perspective of campus administrators in the Title IX process, asking questions of the friends of Abby and Kyle that come across very skeptical of the sexual assault, questions that do come across a little bit victim blaming and shaming. There are even questions that come across as if the friends were not doing a great job at being there for their friend, as we do see with Lori. So we know that this happens to a lot of students who go through this kind of process. Can you walk us through what it was like to film this perspective of this process in particular?
Yeah, so the way that I view like not just sexual trauma, but pretty much any trauma or like horrific event that happens is it's not just happening to the individual, it's happening to the collective. And even if you're not the primary target of violence, I think if you're an empathetic person, which most people I believe are, then you'll have these secondary trauma reactions, or you won't behave in maybe the way that you're the higher version of yourself would want to behave, because you're witnessing someone in pain and you're not always sure of how to support them. And of course you have your own biases and your own myths that you've internalized that you haven't processed yet too. So when I was writing Lori, I was thinking of several different things she's going through. Is like, first, she, her friend is in pain and she wants to help, and she feels guilt because she left the party, and she feels responsible that her leaving the party made her friend vulnerable. So she's not really wanting to confront her own guilt. And then it's also, she wants to have a normal college experience. And so there's almost this way she has a social cost if she stays affiliated with Abby, who's being bullied and who's being seen as a liar and taking down the popular guy and all that stuff. Then she's going to lose her own social status. So it is it is a complicated role. And I think the way that we leave Lori is she's in this new life with the sorority girls, and she's sitting there and she's kind of like, oh no, what did I what did I choose? Because these people aren't really like aligned with who I want to be. And I think that's relatable for students, because college is a time where we're learning about ourselves, and of course we're going to make mistakes and like hurt our friends and all of that. But when this gets layered on top of it, where she's like, it's really hard to witness Abby in pain, and she did the thing she thought she should do, which is help her report and help her tell her family and all of that. So yeah, it's very difficult to be there for someone who's suffering and to know what the right thing is. And I do think that Lori is also experiencing her own like traumatic symptoms as well, because she's so close to the event. So I was hoping to talk more about what secondary trauma is, or what collective trauma is, a little bit with her character too.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for that. I was about to say we should be doing what a survivor needs, but there's also a layer of like having to take care of yourself, because there is that secondary trauma that can affect you, that can affect your ability to get to class, to do your schoolwork, and to whether it's in higher ed or not, just to finish school. And so we really appreciated that. Oh, thanks to everyone who's sharing questions either publicly or privately in the chat. Please keep them coming. And then on this topic, I do want to say that it's really nice to see sexual violence in the film as something that is a community effort. Like sexual violence affects all of us. It affects us as a community. And like Kenyora and I are doing some work on Title IX right now, and we're hoping that we're able to really revamp Title IX into something that is really helpful for students, and put some of those protections back in, but especially for people who don't choose to report, right? And so like survivors who are in need of XYZ and their community as well. Like the school should be there to protect all of us. So some of those like more restorative approaches we're hoping to like get into this version of Title IX. And so we really appreciate seeing that in the film. And then I will move on to a question for Carly. So we know that many students who endure sexual assault go through various emotions and thoughts following the assault, and especially when they decide to report to the police and or through their campus Title IX process. So what we know is that there are many coping strategies and mechanisms that survivors endure. And in Abby's case, we see her withdraw at times, or seem to be okay at other times, sort of like we were mentioning earlier. And we see questions from either the police or campus staff that come across as very skeptical and victim blamey, or and Abby appears to be withdrawn in that situation. So what did you learn about this process as you were demonstrating all of these emotions when you were playing Abby?
I guess I mainly learned that it's just not an empathetic process, at least at the time when we were making the film, it wasn't, because you don't really see the awareness in these adults that are questioning her, that like they're asking her to relive the event with every single detail and like every single pressing question, and you don't see them understand that she's in a fog, you know. It's like direct aftermath of the event, and you don't see them like giving her any type of break or like any type of understanding. And you know, she's away from home for the first time. This happens like her first semester, her first time like going out with her roommate who she doesn't really know that well, you know, like it's hard for her, and you don't see people understand or take into account at all the things that are going on as she's like doing what she's been told is the right thing to do. So that's what I learned, is mostly just like having empathy for her and for people who are just trying to move on with their lives after something like this or something traumatic.
Yeah, absolutely. Like people who are trying to, they're doing their best and they're extremely misunderstood.
Yeah.
Thanks for that.
Yeah. Like adults, like adult stranger men and women asking her these questions, like you don't see them like realizing the weight of their questions and the weight of the topic and just everything. I mean,
Right.
yeah,
We talk about training students, but what about training the people who are responding to them, right? Like
totally.
there should be more requirements to do that, and maybe more than one time a year. And these are things that we should also be talking about. It's not just about training the students. Like there are a lot of people who respond who aren't properly trained, and it's really important to understand those different layers of survivors.
Yeah. Maybe Juliana wants to hop in because we used parts of the film as like training for like the University of Michigan medical field.
Yeah, we showed the film, like a rough cut of one of the episodes, and there was an organizer there who wanted to use it to train the staff at the University of Michigan hospital system, who would be like the first responder if somebody came in for a rape kit. And those are the sorts of things that we're hoping, is that by like what Carly was just saying, reflecting back the behaviors that, hopefully people will then register, like you're saying, the weight of their words, and just how much it means to have that like empathetic first responder, which is very, very rare. Not, and I don't want to like discourage people from doing what they feel they need to do to come forward, but I also feel like managing expectations is important too.
Yeah, thank you both for that. Also, that's really amazing. That's great, and extremely needed. So hopefully that continues to happen, and maybe through this film it will. So that's really exciting. But yes, people should be trained to do that. Even the people who are making these rules, right? Who are creating these systems, are they being trained? Are they consulting the survivors? So really important questions. Thank you for that. Here's sort of like a more general question for both of you, but in the film we witness Lori encouraging Abby to report to the police, but at the end of the day, not really understanding Abby's new behaviors and decides to move out of their room. This leaves Abby feeling really isolated. So why was it important to show this in the film? And could you both talk about sort of like what it was like to go through filming that?
I can start, and then Carly, whenever you want to hop in, just hop in. Because I think what comes to mind with this question is that moment when, so Savannah Crosby, who played Lori, she is wiping Abby's feet when they first come back to their room, because Abby like didn't take her shoes with her when she ran out of the house. And like that to me was just such an important moment to show of like the before and after, where it's like that, like again, like she wants to care for her and doesn't know how, and the way that she's been taught to care is like, okay, you go to the police and the police will handle it because police are on her side, right? I think showing just the way that the systems are complicit in hurting survivors and isolating them by not being designed in empathetic ways, like you're saying. It's I wanted to show that, and I think with Lori moving out, again, it's like just another way that like the loss that happens, I think, with an event like this. And people think it might just be the event itself is the pain, but then there are all these other losses, like Abby can't go to class anymore because of her traumatic symptoms, and she can't have a friendship anymore. And it's not just the one thing that's happened to your body, it's like everything that comes after too.
Yeah, it's sad, and well, Savannah was my actual roommate when we were filming this, so I just like want to like plug that because it was like a nice, it was nice to have that with her um between filming. But Lori believes that she's like doing the right thing by helping Abby come forward, but then neither of them really realize what that means at the moment, and then neither of them really realize that like Lori can't actually support her that much once the process has started because it's just Abby alone. And it happens so early in the semester. Abby hasn't created a little community for herself. So like the microcosm is super small. And Lori says at one point, I shouldn't be the only one that knows about this. But Abby just doesn't really have any like other options at that point. I mean, she has her mom who she relies on, and her boyfriend is no longer around, and it's so sad.
Yeah, thank you both. Yeah, that's absolutely true. In some of our trainings, we talk about institutional betrayal, and it's important to remember that institutional betrayal for survivors can be when you are going to report and your institution, your actual institution, your school lets you down. But it can also be your friend group, right? Like an institutional betrayal can come from any group of people that you think that you trust, or that you do trust, and then they let you down, right? And so all of these different layers are really important to think about, because it's a lot to be let down both by your institution and then by certain friend groups, or by like people that don't exist that you wish did. So we thought that was just a powerful part of the film. So we did get a question from the audience that we want to ask. So did you ever expect to film the movie when you were writing the script? That's a good question.
Yeah, so we did actually try, Carly and I. So Carly's not just an actress, she's also like a producer and has all these different hats that she wears. So like we were together going to raise money to turn it into a feature film in 2019. The years just have blurred together because of the pandemic. But yeah, unfortunately we didn't raise the money through our crowdfunding campaign. And so that's why we revisited, okay, what do we have and what impact can we make with what we have. It is still like, I think, the lingering thought of doing the film, because one thing that is absent is I don't show any like survivors of color or queer survivors. And in the feature script, we go more into the campus community, and there's like a plot with the student reporters that brings in other sorts of perspectives. So that's the one like pull of like, oh, I want to tell the full thing, but I still am like pleased with what we have. But I'd let Carly speak to that too, because I know she has an interest in it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just been a really wild ride because we filmed this in the summer of 2016. And so we're right on the cusp of Me Too actually like becoming a movement. And so there was definitely like the sense of the topic being like in the cultural atmosphere, but like it wasn't really there yet, and we hadn't really talked about it yet. And then Donald Trump was elected, and I remember in one of the scenes, I was like, we were about to shoot, and I had my like Hillary Clinton button on my jacket, and I didn't think about it, but we took it off just in case. But then like Donald Trump got elected, it was like, wow, that really would have dated it like more than we thought. And so like the themes of consent have just evolved so much since we like first filmed it. And that's been like really interesting to see the story stand as the times have changed in such like a wild way. So yeah, we've talked a little bit about like what the story will mean like this fall when students are coming back to campus after a year plus of isolation, and what the parties are going to look like then. But also, you know, Gen Z and like students now seem to have more of a grasp on these topics than like say like me or Juliana did when we were in college. And so like what does that world even look like? But um, you know, the plight of her just trying to like move on, and the plight of the community trying to like incorporate this and also move on, I think is like timeless regardless of the state of the topic in like the news and stuff like that. But it's been really interesting to see all the changes.
Yeah, that's really interesting that you were wearing the Hillary Clinton pin. Really,
Yeah,
really takes you back to a rough time.
yeah. It was just, you know, we got like Me Too, and like we hear about these, you know, horrible and like violent topics, and then we get like Aziz Ansari where it's like okay, a little bit more relatable, and like Abby's story is like, where is Abby's story on that spectrum? But like to see the spectrum at all is like a change from what it was before. It's just been wild. And like now like wearing a mask, like that's an element of consent sort of, you know, like it just it changes so much.
Right. Yeah. The conversation has been changing into really understanding that these aren't criminal acts that only happen sometimes. Like we're now understanding that this is a part of society, and this is a problem that we all have to address because, again, as a community, we are affected by it. So that's really interesting. We have another question from the audience. What was it like to work with those who portrayed the campus administrators and the police officers? What have they shared with you about what they learned about the Title IX process?
Yeah, so we're really fortunate that we like had this group of actors who were mostly based in Detroit. So we really used all Michigan talent, which was something we were really proud of, that we like kept it very local. And one of them, Donovan Darius, who plays one of the police officers, he used to be, I believe, an FBI agent. So before he gave it up to pursue acting, so he had this like intensity of like just that was his job. But then also like I think he, you know, I hope I can say that, I'm sure I can say it, but that he, you know, was skeptical of what he was doing, you know, as a career. And so it was interesting to have someone who had worked in the field then come in and like have to be part of like revealing the problems with this system. And I think like Shelby Bradley, who played Dean Deborah Mullins, she talked to me a lot about how she is a consultant in business. She has an MBA, and so she had experience as a woman like within that industry of like bullying and not being taken seriously, and how much harder she has to work just to get at the table. And I think I started seeing those connections more with Title IX. And so did they, that like, oh, these are not just, it's not just the sexual violence, it's also all those other ways like people get invalidated in their places of work or study. And so it's interesting to have them, and a lot of them were parents too, so they were also wondering, what can I do for my kids to make this not happen? Or we had a mother of a son and she's like, what can I do? So I think even the adult cast started connecting more to the scene through it. And I know Carly had like pretty much a scene with every one of them. Like you had all of the officers, and yeah.
Yeah, it was I remember those being like pretty somber filming experiences. You know, we weren't really like chatting that much. Maybe a little more so with the scenes with character's mom. But yeah, it wasn't really like a chummy atmosphere. We were kind of like doing the takes, and it wasn't, they're so like structured like interview questions, so there wasn't really like the type of like scene study or like character to character motivational stuff that like maybe you would get with different types of scenes. But I it was like a good experience. They were all really professional, and I think all their performances are really strong. So yeah.
Thanks. And yeah, it's interesting that you say that the like filming it was actually sort of a somber experience. 'Cause I do, like to what extent is that realistic? That like as they ask these questions that are like pre-written questions that they just have to ask you, right? Like this is something that they are reading and they are getting their job done and then moving on. Which is, scary what to think about. Like that's what a survivor goes through, and like hopefully they have an advocate with them at that time, but like you're not guaranteed an advocate in every state. So yeah, like in a scary way, maybe a little bit realistic. Oh, we do have another question. Do you plan on making another movie with the same topic?
That's interesting. So I've written like several other scripts. I think as a writer, I'm usually drawn to telling stories of women. So there's not like sexual violence present in those other scripts so much as like dealing with ideas of like um, connecting to your power or identity, and like and I think those themes are kind of in this film too, obviously, like but I haven't written anything that deals directly with a situation of rape like I do here. Yeah, because but I do see them as all interconnected in my mind. But yeah, I know Carly is also, I don't know if you want to talk about Carly, but Carly also, like I said, she wears lots of hats, but she also is writing something, I believe. I don't know if you want to share anything about that.
I'm writing something right now. I guess it's not it doesn't really go into the topic of sexual assault, but I'm writing like a piece sort of about COVID, and it's about two girls sheltering in place that sort of like meet on Instagram, and then they decide to like, let's shelter in place together in my grandmother's condo, and like how things sort of like spin out of control in like the microcosm. So I guess there's similar themes to reacting to something big in a small environment. Um, but it's interesting, back in 2018, 2019, when we were fundraising for this story, which we were trying to turn into a feature film, I was in a couple of plays, and in one of the plays, I played a character who's like, the character's scenes were with a therapist, and she's like a teen girl with an eating disorder. So like that was a trauma role. And then I was in another play, which was about the radium girls, which were women in the 1920s who they all get radium poisoning from their job, which was like painting the numbers on watches with glow in the dark radium paint. So it was sort of funny to see like very, very different, not completely like sexual in nature at all, but different traumatic situations that women are placed in like dramatic works. So that was interesting. And, a lot of plays and a lot of movies, I feel like the focal point is a woman bearing some traumatic burden and trying to make sense of it. So in that way, yes.
Awesome. Well, thank you both for all the work that you're still doing. And yeah, it's interesting because it's different topics, but they're all intersectional. There are, it's almost like seeing the like ways that we're treated in healthy and unhealthy ways, both like in an industry or with our peers, just generally in society. So thanks, and we hope that that goes well and that you're able to turn that into something really great. So we've talked about this a little bit already, but what do both of you want the viewers to walk away with when they watch this film?
For me, it's just to remember that these are all just people, and like more than that, they're young adults, you know, they're kids, like trying to live, trying to survive, trying to find themselves, you know, and when something like this happens, you just have to keep going. But like to have empathy in your heart for just for people, that's sort of what I continue to take away with from this is just everyone's just a person, everyone's trying their best, everyone believes that they're right, you know, everyone's acting in what they think is the right way to act. And when something like this happens, it can like throw you out of yourself and make you, it can alienate you, it can make people think that you're being weird. But you know, everyone can relate to like being thrown out of themselves by something. So just the universality of life and of moving on from something that's challenging or horrible, or you know, the bad times.
Yeah, I second that. And like, I think, you know, I hope that any survivor or friend or family who sees it and can see themselves in it and just know through that, that like, you know, they're not crazy for the way that they're acting. And like, it's if they're being betrayed, like you're saying, by their institution or being brushed off, that doesn't mean that what happened to them doesn't matter. Just means that they're around people who have limitations to the empathy that Carly is talking about, and like it's nothing wrong with you. And that I think a lot of times we get these trauma narratives of like redemption, like running a marathon and like you've done it, you've healed. And like I don't think that that's the experience for most people, that there's like this moment, this shiny moment of like, okay, I'm done now, like or I ran my marathon or something. I want to bring it back to earth of like, okay, this is, you know, it's something that you live alongside, and you don't have to become like this glorified version of yourself in order to move on. Like Carly's saying, it's just, you know, one step at a time.
Yeah, thank you both for that. I think this will be really helpful for a lot of survivors. Based on the time, it looks like we have quite enough time for maybe one or two more questions. So to both of you, so towards the end of the film, campus administrators were going back and forth on their decision on what to do with and for Abby with respect to support and accommodations, and Kyle being allowed to stay on campus. In some cases, we know that some, if not most, decisions result in the accused being allowed to stay on campus despite what they have done. Why do you think that this results like this occur more often than not?
Hard question. I mean, Kyle's just a person too, you know, like he's just a boy. He can't see at the time really that what he did was so wrong. And since, you know, since we filmed this, again, with cases like Aziz Ansari, like it's become more in the cultural conversation of like ongoing consent. And like, I feel like it brought to the table the topic of like men actually sort of paying attention to what's going on in like a hookup situation. And like, you know, I think every woman may, I mean, it's not right to speak for every woman, but I definitely have been in situations where I've been like, oh my God, you are not actually paying attention to like me. You're paying attention to you and what you think you want to do, and like you see like you don't see sometimes with men, like they're just not paying it, they're just not paying attention. And so like, but he's a person, you know, and he's got to like learn. He's not going to like stop being a person. He's not going to stop being in the world. He's not going to stop interacting with other people. And so in that way, like, to kick him out of university, is that the right way to handle a situation? Like, I don't even really know. I mean, and it's sort of an ongoing theme that piecing together like sort of like restorative justice, but like healing. And I feel like I'm not being very coherent with this, but like learning these things, like he's got to learn these things like people can learn. And so in that way, it's like, I don't know if kicking him off campus would be like the right thing to do, but it's not right for Abby to like bump into him in her hallway, you know, when she's like trying to move on from this. So there's a lot of questions about how we can handle something like this.
Absolutely. I mean, you're right. Is kicking him off campus going to mean that he's not going to go somewhere off campus and do this again? Like, are we teaching him anything? It's almost a way for the school to get away with it without doing a whole lot. Like, there's no educational process involved. So is it going to make a structural change in society? Is there going to be a big change? Are we then safe because he's not on campus? Like, many layers, but at the same time, like, if this is something that the survivor needs in order to get to class, how can we prioritize that? So yeah, thank you and it did make a lot of sense, so thank you. Juliana, thoughts?
Yeah, no, I love the way Carly put it, of like just how like untrained a lot of men are. And you know, speaking like of like heterosexual men in particular right now, because especially in Kyle's case, he's like a privileged white man on campus. I feel like there's probably not been a lot of moments where he's ever been challenged in his life or had to like think outside of his own individual experience. So I love that Carly brought that up, of like, you're just not paying attention. But I also think like I'm thinking of like, there was a law firm in Ann Arbor where college was, that specialized in representing men accused of rape, like within like 5 square blocks of campus. And you know, there wasn't one that specialized for survivors, you know, and there wasn't at the time, like, I mean, there were ways there was like you know, ways that they could access like advocacy or victims advocate on campus, but it just that was why I showed Kyle having a lawyer in the room, was I'm like, okay, he has this access to wealth, and he can kind of threaten the school with that action of like, I got my lawyer here. and Abby doesn't have a lawyer in the room with her. So I wanted to also show how like class can play into it, or you know, the school might be afraid of a lawsuit, they don't want to be the rape school. So it's complicated. And when I wrote that moment, it was like a philosophical debate I was having in my own head with each of the tribunal members, where I'm like, okay, like you know, like I don't believe like in things like so far on the justice spectrum as like the death penalty, like we just eliminate someone or put them in jail for life. Like I don't believe in that. And like, is criminalizing always the best? And then also, you know, John being like, well, it's a yes or no, like it's her story versus hers, and all of that conversation was happening in my head of like, how do we sort through it, and what is the right answer? And I feel like it, like you're saying, it depends on the situation, depends on what the survivor wants, and like centering what the survivor wants. Yeah, but it's difficult, and each campus handles it differently, and some are more progressive than others, as I'm sure you both know. But yeah, you can set the standard at your own school, which I think is maybe the hopeful part. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Very, very true. All of this is very true. I'm like getting fired up now, right? Because the school should should really have the survivors' best interest in mind when they're making these decisions, but sometimes it's more like, what is the insurance company going to say? And what is the public statement going to be? When really it should be like, how do we make sure that this doesn't happen again? And that people are actually safe on our campus. So yeah, again, just getting a little fired up. We are reaching the end of our time. So I want to ask you just one last question. You've both gone into this a little bit, but I also just want to open up to anything that you'd like to share for the audience. But in particular, what advice would you give to survivors of campus sexual assault and to peers of survivors of sexual assault who might be going through something similar?
Say like, listen, you know, if you identify as a survivor, listen as best you can to yourself and what you need to feel okay. And for people around someone who maybe is trying to move on from a traumatic event, to listen to them and to have an open heart, and to feel for them, to have, I mean, it all just comes down to like empathy for humans.
Yeah, I love that. And I think it really, obviously there's huge structural things that need to change. And, that can feel really overwhelming of like, how do I fix it? But I also think survivors should know that it's not your responsibility to fix it. Like, it's the responsibility to take care of yourself. And I also think just find each other and know that there are like a lot of you out there, and there are a lot of people who are good people and like who want to hear, like Carly's saying, who will listen to you. And like, if you haven't found them yet, you'll find them. So don't don't give up in that way. And yeah, I think just trust that, like, time, give yourself time and give others time and space just to do what they need to do. Yeah, so I hope that, yeah, just find connection when and if you can.
Yeah, thank you both so much. Okay, so to listen, to really listen, and to give yourself time to find connections. I think that's really good advice for everyone, and especially for survivors or a friend of a survivor. So thank you so much. We unfortunately are reaching the end of our time, but I just want to say thank you for giving us this really amazing film that is extremely relatable and covers these topics in a really honest way. And thank you also for being on today and having this conversation. It's been really nice to just have a very candid conversation with both of you and hear your thoughts on the making of this film, and hopefully what will be its really long and big impact. And from here, I want to pass it on to Kenyora for a closing. Again, to anyone in the audience who hasn't seen the film, you still can. So Kenyora, passing it on to you.
Hello again. Again, just want to thank you both, Juliana and Carly, for being here and being with us, and definitely providing us with your gifts and showing the nuances throughout your film. And I also wanted to share that when we were promoting this, I did receive a comment from someone who was like, this should be a part of like orientation, a part of comprehensive sex education, because what you have basically been able to distill is the fact that there are so many nuances that go on in sexual assault cases, whether it's through the Title IX process or reporting through law enforcement. And so you were able to show kind of just the complexities that exist there, that we definitely have to highlight and showcase of what truly happens, what truly goes on, in the reporting process, and what happens for survivors themselves. And so thank you again for your portrayal of this in such a concrete and realistic way. And for all of you who are survivors out there who had the chance to either watch the film or who haven't had the chance to watch the film, again, the link is here for you to view it and watch it at your convenience. And you can also follow the university at the University Series on their Instagram. And for those of you who are survivors out there, we also want you to know that you are not alone in this. You definitely have a community, whether it's through NRAPE on Campus or It's on Us, or Carly and Juliana through the university. We definitely want you to know that you are not alone. And so between both of our organizations, NRAPE on Campus, please be on the lookout for our Sexual Assault Awareness Month events that we'll be sharing very soon. And you can join our respective email lists that I've provided for you in the chat below. So please make sure to take care of yourself as we're still in this pandemic time, but be safe, be well, and just have a wonderful weekend. And make sure, please, please, please get some rest. Champion of rest. It's important. But thank you again, Juliana and Carly and Sylvia, for your amazing facilitation of this conversation. Until we meet again, take care.
Bye again. Thank you so much.